The hammer slipped from my hand, clattering against the wooden floor of the guest house I'd spent 6 months building. Sweat stung my eyes, but it was the sting of my father's words that burned deeper. "You're out by tonight, Ethan." I stood frozen, the scent of fresh cedar filling the air, staring at the man who'd raised me, now a stranger with a face carved from stone. It was supposed to be a gift, a guest house for my parents, John and Margaret, paid for with every cent I'd saved from years of carpentry work. At 30, I'd poured my heart into this project, believing it would mend the cracks in our family, the ones that had deepened since my brother's death 5 years ago. Grief had turned them cold, distant, but I thought this, my sweat, my craft, my love, could bring us back together. I was wrong. The day started like any other. I woke at dawn, the Texas sun already blistering, and hauled lumber from the truck to the backyard. The guest house was nearly done, a quaint 400-square-foot haven with cedar walls, a sloped roof, and wide windows to catch the evening breeze. I'd built it by hand, every nail driven with purpose, every board sanded smooth. It wasn't just a structure, it was my apology for not being enough, for not filling the void left by Caleb. Caleb, my older brother, had been the golden child, charming, athletic, the one who could do no wrong. When he died in a car accident at 27, it shattered us all. My parents never recovered. They stopped talking to me, stopped seeing me. I became a ghost in their house, tolerated but not loved. So, when they mentioned wanting a guest house for visitors, I jumped at the chance. I cashed out my savings, $40,000, every penny I had, and started building. I thought it would prove I was still their son. That morning, as I installed the final window frame, Mom brought me a glass of iced tea. It was the first kind gesture in months, and I clung to it like a lifeline. "Looks good, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but distant. I smiled, hoping it was a sign things were thawing. I didn't know it was a lie. By noon, the guest house was finished. I stepped back, wiping sawdust from my jeans, and admired the work. The cedar glowed in the sunlight, the porch inviting, the interior cozy with a small fireplace I'd added as a surprise. I imagined my parents hosting their church group, bragging about their son's craftsmanship. I called them out to see it. Dad walked over first, his boots crunching on the gravel. Mom followed, her arms crossed. I expected pride, maybe a clap on the shoulder. Instead, Dad's eyes were hard, his jaw set. "It's done," I said, gesturing to the guest house. "Ready for you to use." He didn't even look at it. "We're selling the house," he said flatly. "You need to be out by tonight." I laughed, thinking it was a bad joke. "What are you talking about?" Mom stepped forward, her voice clipped. "We're moving to Florida. The realtor's coming tomorrow. We don't need you here anymore." The words hit like a sledgehammer. I staggered back, my hand gripping the porch railing. "I built this for you," I said, my voice breaking. "I spent everything I had." Dad shrugged. "You wanted to build it. We didn't ask you to." I looked at Mom, searching for a flicker of the woman who'd raised me, who'd bandaged my skinned knees and cheered at my little league games. But her eyes were empty, like she was looking through me. "You're 30, Ethan," she said. "It's time you figured things out on your own." I wanted to scream, to shake them, to demand why they hated me. But I just stood there, numb, as they turned and walked back to the house. The guest house, my labor of love, mocked me with its perfection. I'd built it for them, and they'd used it to cut me out of their lives. I spent the afternoon packing my tools and clothes into my beat-up truck. The backyard, once a place of laughter and barbecues, felt like a graveyard. I kept replaying their words, searching for a reason. Was it because I wasn't Caleb? Because I'd stayed while he was gone? Or was it just easier to erase me than face their pain? As the sun set, I took one last look at the guest house. It stood proud, a testament to my skill and my stupidity. I'd thought love could be built with wood and nails, but I'd been wrong. I climbed into my truck, the engine sputtering to life, and drove away from the only home I'd ever known. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a gray ribbon under a starless Texas sky. My truck's headlights barely cut through the darkness, much like my thoughts couldn't pierce the fog of betrayal. I had nowhere to go, no plan, just $200 in my wallet and a heart heavy with questions I'd never get answered. I ended up at a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and cigarette burns on the carpet. The clerk, a tired woman with graying hair, didn't ask questions as I handed over my cash. In the room, I sat on the sagging bed, staring at my calloused hands. They'd built something beautiful, something meant to last, and it hadn't mattered. My parents had discarded me like scrap wood. Sleep didn't come. Instead, memories did. Caleb teaching me to throw a baseball, his laugh echoing in the backyard. Mom baking pies for Thanksgiving, her apron dusted with flour. Dad showing me how to swing a hammer, his rare smile warming the air. Those moments felt like another life, one where I belonged. Now, I was an outsider, exiled from my own family. The next morning, I drove to a diner, the kind where truckers and locals swapped stories over greasy eggs. I nursed a coffee, trying to figure out my next move. My phone buzzed, a text from my cousin, Sarah, who lived an hour away in Austin. Heard what happened. Come stay with me. No questions asked. Sarah was the only family member who'd ever checked in after Caleb's death. I didn't want her pity, but I had no other options. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with plants and mismatched furniture. Sarah, 28 and fiercely independent, hugged me tightly when I arrived. I can't believe they did this, she said, her brown eyes flashing with anger. You don't deserve it, Ethan. I shrugged, setting my duffel bag by the couch. Doesn't matter what I deserve. It's done. She didn't push, just handed me a beer and let me sit in silence. That night, I told her everything. The guest house, the money, the way my parents' words had gutted me. Sarah listened, her face softening. They're grieving, she said finally. But that doesn't justify this. You're their son. Her words stirred something in me, a spark of anger I'd buried under hurt. I'd spent years trying to fix my parents' pain, to be the son they could still love. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe their grief wasn't my burden to carry. Over the next few days, I took odd jobs around Austin, fixing fences and building decks. The work kept my hands busy and my mind from spiraling. But every night, I'd lie on Sarah's couch, replaying that final moment in the backyard. I couldn't shake the image of my parents standing on the porch, their faces blank, as if I'd never meant anything to them. One evening, Sarah came home with a flyer for a local carpentry co-op. They're looking for skilled builders, she said, tossing it onto the coffee table. You're better than odd jobs, Ethan. You could make something of this. I glanced at the flyer, skeptical. Joining a co-op meant starting over, trusting strangers, building a new life. I wasn't sure I had it in me. But Sarah's belief in me was a lifeline, and I wasn't ready to let go. The next day, I drove to the co-op's workshop, a converted warehouse filled with the hum of saws and the scent of pine. The manager, a grizzled man named Tom, looked over my portfolio, photos of the guest house I'd built. His eyebrows rose. This is damn fine work, he said. Why were you slumming it with odd jobs? I hesitated, then told him the truth. Not the whole story, just enough. I'd built the guest house for family, and it hadn't worked out. Tom nodded, no judgment in his eyes. Family can be rough, he said. But talent like yours, that's yours to keep. Join us. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. The co-op was a chance to rebuild, not just structures, but myself. I signed on, and for the next week, I threw myself into the work, cutting beams, framing walls, teaching younger apprentices. It wasn't home, but it was something. Still, the hurt lingered. I couldn't stop wondering why my parents had done it. Had they planned it all along? Was the guest house just a way to keep me busy while they plotted their escape? The questions gnawed at me, but answers were out of reach. For now, I had to focus on surviving, on finding a place to belong. The co-op became my sanctuary, a place where my hands could create without betrayal. Each day, I lost myself in the rhythm of saws and hammers, building custom furniture and garden sheds for clients who appreciated my work. But no matter how busy I kept, the wound of my parents' rejection festered, a quiet ache that surfaced in the stillness of night. Tom, the co-op manager, took me under his wing. He was in his late 50s, with a weathered face and a knack for seeing through people's walls. One afternoon, as we sanded a walnut table, he asked, "You ever gonna tell me what really happened with that guest house?" I kept my eyes on the wood, the sandpaper hissing under my hand. Not much to tell. Built it for my parents. They didn't want it. Or me. Tom grunted, setting down his sandpaper. Sounds like they're the ones missing out. But you're carrying it like it's your fault. His words hit too close. I'd spent weeks blaming myself, wondering what I could have done differently. Built the guest house faster? Been more like Caleb? But Tom's steady gaze made me question that narrative. Maybe it wasn't about me at all. That evening, Sarah dragged me to a local bar to get out of my head. The place was packed, the air thick with laughter and beer. She introduced me to her friend, Lena, a 29-year-old architect with sharp green eyes and a quick wit. Lena asked about my work, and for the first time, I talked about the guest house without bitterness. Her genuine interest felt like a balm, easing the raw edges of my hurt. You should be proud of that, Lena said, sipping her drink. Not many people can build something like that from scratch. I shrugged, but her words stayed with me. Pride wasn't something I'd let myself feel, not yet. But Lena's encouragement, like Sarah's, planted a seed. Maybe I could rebuild more than just wood and nails. A week later, I got a call from an unknown number. My heart leapt, foolishly hoping it was my parents. Instead, it was the realtor handling their house sale. Ethan, I'm sorry to bother you, she said, her voice hesitant. Your parents listed the property, but there's an issue with the guest house. My stomach twisted. What kind of issue? The buyers love it, but your parents didn't disclose it was unpermitted. The city's threatening fines unless it's brought up to code. I laughed, a bitter sound. Of course, I'd built the guest house to code, but my parents hadn't bothered with permits, probably to save a few bucks. Now it was my problem? Not my house, not my issue, I said, hanging up. But the call left me rattled. I pictured the guest house, my guest house, being torn down, its cedar walls reduced to rubble. The thought was unbearable. I called Sarah, who was furious. They can't just dump this on you, she said. Let them deal with it. I wanted to agree, but something stopped me. The guest house was more than a structure. It was a piece of me. I couldn't let it be destroyed, even if my parents didn't deserve it. Against my better judgment, I called the realtor back. What needs to be done? She explained the process, retroactive permits, inspections, and a few minor fixes. It would cost time and money I didn't have. But I couldn't walk away. I agreed to handle it, telling myself it was for the guest house, not for them. The next day, I drove back to my parents' house. The backyard looked untouched, the guest house gleaming like it was waiting for me. My parents weren't home, but the realtor let me in. As I walked through the guest house, checking the wiring and plumbing, memories flooded back. Every nail I'd driven, every late night spent sanding. It was perfect, and it was mine, even if they'd rejected it. I spent the next week navigating city bureaucracy, paying fees out of my meager savings, and making small tweaks to satisfy the inspector. The co-op helped, with Tom lending me tools and advice. When the final inspection passed, I felt a strange mix of relief and resentment. I'd saved the guest house, but for what? So my parents could profit from selling it? As I locked up the guest house for the last time, I realized something. I wasn't doing this for them anymore. I was doing it for me, to prove I could finish what I started, even when it hurt. I drove back to Austin, the weight of their betrayal still heavy, but no longer crushing. I had work, a place to stay, and people who believed in me. Maybe that was enough to start over. The guest house was saved, but the victory felt hollow. I'd poured my soul into fixing what my parents had neglected, only to hand it back to them for their Florida dreams. Back in Austin, I threw myself into the co-op, determined to build a life that didn't revolve around their approval. Tom noticed the change. You're different, he said one day, as we assembled a bookshelf for a client. Less like you're carrying the world. I nodded, not trusting myself to explain. The co-op had given me purpose, a place where my skills mattered. I was good at this, building things, creating order from chaos. It was a small redemption, but it was mine. Lena started showing up at the co-op, bringing sketches for custom projects. Her designs were bold, blending modern lines with rustic warmth, and I loved bringing them to life. One evening, as we worked late on a dining table, she asked, "Why carpentry? You could have done anything." I sanded a rough edge, thinking, "It's honest," I said. "You can't fake a good joint or a smooth finish. It's real." She smiled, her green eyes catching the workshop's light. Like you. Her words caught me off guard, stirring something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe, or the possibility of connection. But I pushed it down. I wasn't ready to trust anyone, not after my parents. A month later, Sarah forwarded me an email from the realtor. The house had sold, guest house included, for a price that made my stomach churn. My parents had made a fortune, and I hadn't seen a dime. Worse, they hadn't even called to thank me for fixing their mess. I wanted to be angry, but I was just tired. Tired of chasing their love, tired of being invisible. Sarah, predictably, was livid. "They don't deserve you," she said, slamming her laptop shut. "You need to confront them, Ethan. Get closure." I shook my head. What's the point? They made their choice. But her words lingered. Closure. I didn't know if I believed in it, but I couldn't keep living with this weight. I decided to write them a letter, not to beg or accuse, but to say goodbye on my terms. I sat at Sarah's kitchen table, pen in hand, and let the words spill out. Dear Mom and Dad, I built the guest house because I thought it would bring us closer. I thought it would show you I was still your son, even after Caleb. But you didn't want it, or me. I don't know why, and maybe I never will. But I'm done trying to fix what you broke. I'm building a life now, one that's mine. I hope you find peace in Florida. I'm finding mine here. Ethan. I mailed it the next day, feeling lighter but not free. I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't get one. But putting my pain into words had shifted something. I wasn't just their rejected son anymore. I was Ethan, the carpenter, the man who'd built something beautiful and walked away. At the co-op, I started taking on bigger projects, leading a team of apprentices. Tom promoted me to crew chief, a role that came with a small pay bump and a lot of responsibility. I thrived on it, finding purpose in teaching others what I'd learned. Lena's projects became a regular part of my work, and our late-night sessions turned into something more, friendship, maybe, with a hint of possibility I wasn't ready to name. I stared at the sketch, my throat tight. A home of my own. The idea felt foreign, but it sparked something deep inside, a desire to build for myself, to create a space where I belonged. I looked at Lena, her face open and encouraging, and nodded. Let's do it. That night, I dreamed of the guest house, but this time, it wasn't my parents' backyard. It was mine, a place I'd built for me, filled with light and laughter. When I woke, the dream lingered, a promise of what could be. I wasn't there yet, but I was closer than I'd ever been. The tiny house project became my obsession. Lena's design was perfect, a 300-square-foot haven with a loft bed, a compact kitchen, and a porch for morning coffee. I saved every penny from my co-op work, scrounged materials from leftover projects, and spent evenings sketching out the build with Lena. For the first time in months, I felt like I was building towards something, not just running from pain. The co-op crew pitched in, offering spare lumber and extra hands. Tom donated a set of reclaimed windows, their glass wavy with age. Make it yours, he said, clapping my shoulder. I nodded, grateful for the family I was finding in these strangers. Lena was there every step of the way, her architect's eye catching details I missed. We worked late, laughing over takeout pizza, debating paint colors and cabinet pulls. Her presence was steady, grounding, and I started to let my guard down. One night, as we stained the porch boards, she asked, "Do you ever think about forgiving them?" I paused, the brush dripping amber stain. My parents? I don't know if I can. They didn't just kick me out, they erased me. She nodded, her face thoughtful. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you. Letting go so you can move on. Her words stuck with me, but forgiveness felt like a betrayal of my own pain. I focused on the tiny house instead, pouring my energy into every cut and joint. By spring, the frame was up, a skeleton of pine rising on a small lot I'd rented outside Austin. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then, out of the blue, I got a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter, postmarked from Florida. My hands shook as I opened it, recognizing my mother's neat cursive. Ethan, your father and I got your letter. We didn't know how to respond then, and maybe we still don't. Losing Caleb broke us, and we didn't know how to keep you close without him. The guest house was beautiful, but it reminded us of what we'd lost. a family that felt whole. We're sorry for hurting you. We're trying to find our way. Maybe one day we can talk. Mom. I read it again, then again, searching for the apology I'd wanted for months. It was there, but it felt thin, like a bandage on a broken bone. They were sorry, but they hadn't explained why they'd done it, why they'd chosen to cut me out. I showed the letter to Sarah, who read it with a frown. They're trying, she said, handing it back. But it's not enough, is it? No, I said. But it's something. I didn't write back. Not yet. I needed time to process, to decide what I wanted from them, if anything. The tiny house kept me grounded, its walls rising higher each week. By summer, it was nearly complete, a cozy space with cedar siding and a tin roof that sang in the rain. Lena helped me move in, her laughter filling the air as we hauled in a second-hand couch. That night, we sat on the porch, sharing a beer and watching fireflies dance in the dusk. You did it, she said, her shoulder brushing mine. You built a home. I looked at the tiny house, its windows glowing with soft light. Yeah, I said. I did. But the letter from my parents lingered in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their story, something they hadn't said. I decided to call them. Not to forgive, not yet, but to understand. I dialed their new Florida number, my heart pounding as it rang. Mom answered, her voice tentative. Ethan, I got your letter, I said, keeping my tone even. I need to know why. Why you kicked me out. There was a long pause. Then she spoke, her voice trembling. We couldn't stay in that house anymore. Every corner reminded us of Caleb. The guest house, it was too much. It was like you were trying to replace him. Her words cut deep, but they also made sense. I wasn't Caleb, and I never would be. But I was their son, and they'd thrown me away to escape their grief. I wasn't trying to replace him, I said. I was trying to be your family. I know, she whispered. We were wrong. We talked for an hour, not resolving everything, but opening a door. When I hung up, I felt lighter, not because I'd forgiven them, but because I'd spoken my truth. The tiny house, my new home, was proof I could build a life without their approval. And maybe, just maybe, I could build a bridge back to them, one day. Living in the tiny house felt like a fresh start, a declaration of independence. The space was small, but it was mine, every board, every nail chosen with care. Lena's design had come to life, and I woke each morning to sunlight streaming through the reclaimed windows, a reminder that I'd built something worth keeping. The co-op was thriving, and my role as crew chief gave me purpose. I mentored younger carpenters, teaching them the tricks I'd learned over years of trial and error. Their enthusiasm reminded me of why I loved this work. It wasn't just about wood. It was about creating something lasting. Tom watched with approval, occasionally tossing me new challenges, like a commission for a community center's pavilion. Lena and I grew closer, our friendship deepening into something neither of us named. We spent evenings on my porch, sketching ideas for future projects or just talking about life. She had her own scars, divorced parents, a childhood spent shuttling between homes, but her resilience inspired me. You don't let the past define you, she said one night, her voice soft. You build over it. Her words echoed Lena's earlier advice about forgiveness, and I started to wonder if I could let go of the anger I still carried. My parents' letter had opened a crack in the wall between us, but trust was harder to rebuild. I kept our phone call in my mind, replaying Mom's admission. They'd pushed me away to escape their grief. It didn't excuse what they'd done, but it gave me a lens to understand it. One afternoon, Sarah called with news. I was digging online, she said, her voice tense. Your parents didn't move to Florida just for a fresh start. They bought a condo with the house sale money, and they're renting out the guest house as an Airbnb. I froze, the phone heavy in my hand. The guest house, my guest house, was now a cash cow for strangers on vacation. The betrayal stung anew, not because they were profiting, but because they'd turned my gift into a commodity. They didn't even tell me, I said, my voice flat. I didn't know what doing something meant. Sue them? Confront them again? The thought of more conflict exhausted me. But Sarah's anger lit a fire under me. I couldn't let them erase my work without a fight. I called a lawyer, a friend of Tom's who specialized in property disputes. He reviewed the situation, my savings, the lack of a contract, the permits I'd secured. You've got a case for reimbursement, he said. You paid for the guest house out of pocket, and they're profiting from it. But it'll be messy, Ethan. Family disputes always are. I didn't want a legal battle, but I wanted justice. Not just for the money, but for the piece of myself I'd poured into that guest house. I asked the lawyer to draft a letter demanding compensation for the $40,000 I'd spent. It wasn't about greed. It was about reclaiming what was mine. The letter went out, and a week later, Dad called. His voice was gruff, defensive. You're suing us? After everything. I'm not suing, I said, keeping my tone steady. I'm asking for what I'm owed. I built that guest house for you, and you're making money off it. He was silent for a long moment. We didn't think you'd care, he said finally. You left. You kicked me out. I shot back, the anger I'd buried rising to the surface. You didn't even tell me you were renting it. The call ended with no resolution, but it felt like progress. I'd stood up for myself, something I hadn't done the day they told me to leave. Lena, who'd been at my side when I made the call, squeezed my hand. You're stronger than you think, she said. The tiny house became my refuge as I waited for my parents' response. I added personal touches, a bookshelf for my carpentry manuals, a rug Lena picked out at a flea market. Each addition made it feel more like home, a place where I could heal. The co-op, Lena, Sarah, they were my family now, not by blood but by choice. One evening, as Lena and I painted the loft, she asked, "What do you want from this? From your parents?" I set down my brush, thinking. I want to move on, I said. Not just from them, but from the pain. I want to build a life that's mine. She smiled, her eyes warm. You already are. Her words settled over me like a promise. The tiny house, the co-op, the people who believed in me, they were proof I was more than my parents' rejection. I didn't know what would happen with the guest house or my family, but for the first time, I felt ready to face it. The lawyer's letter worked. 2 weeks later, my parents sent a check for $40,000, no note attached, just a cold transaction. I stared at the paper, expecting relief, but all I felt was emptiness. The money didn't erase the betrayal, didn't rebuild the family I'd lost. Still, I deposited it, using half to pay off the tiny house lot, and the rest to fund new co-op projects. Life in the tiny house was good, simple, honest, mine. Lena moved in, not officially, but often enough that her toothbrush had a permanent spot by the sink. We built a life together, one of late-night talks and shared dreams. The co-op grew, too, with my crew landing a contract to build a community garden pavilion. I was proud, not just of the work, but of the man I was becoming. Sarah visited often, her fierce loyalty a constant. You're better off without them, she said one day, sprawled on my couch. But if you ever want to reach out, I'll back you. I didn't know if I wanted to. My parents' apology letter and the check were steps, but they hadn't bridged the gap. I'd learned to live without their approval, to find worth in my work and the people who chose me. Still, a part of me wondered if we could ever be a family again. One fall morning, I got an email from Mom. They were visiting Austin for a church retreat and wanted to meet. My first instinct was to say no, but Lena's voice echoed in my mind. Forgiveness is about you. I agreed to coffee, neutral ground, no expectations. The cafe was busy, filled with the clink of cups and the hum of conversation. My parents looked older, their faces lined with more than just age. Mom's eyes were red, like she'd been crying. Dad's hands fidgeted with his mug. We're sorry, Ethan, Mom said, her voice breaking. We didn't know how to be your parents after Caleb. Dad nodded, his voice gruff. We thought moving would fix us. But we lost you too. I listened, letting their words sink in. They weren't excuses, not really, just the truth of their pain. I'd spent so long hating them for what they'd done, but sitting there, I saw two people as broken as I'd been. I needed you, I said, my voice steady. And you threw me away. Mom flinched, but Dad met my eyes. We were wrong. We want to make it right. I didn't know if they could. Trust is built slowly, and they'd burned ours to the ground. But I wasn't the same man who'd driven away from their house, heartbroken and lost. I'd built a life, a home, a future. I could choose what came next. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said. But I'm here. That's a start. We talked for hours, not fixing everything, but laying a foundation. They admired the tiny house when I showed them pictures, and for the first time, I saw pride in their eyes. Not for Caleb, but for me. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Months later, the pavilion project was complete, a cedar structure that brought the community together. At the opening, Lena stood by my side, her hand in mine, as Tom gave a speech about second chances. I looked out at the crowd, Sarah, my crew, the neighbors who'd become friends, and felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. My parents and I stayed in touch, cautious but steady. We weren't a family yet, not fully, but we were trying. The guest house was still an Airbnb, a reminder of what I'd lost, but also of what I'd gained. I'd built it with love, and though they hadn't seen it then, I'd found people who did. As I stood on my tiny house porch that evening, Lena beside me, the sunset painting the sky gold, I realized something. I'd built more than a guest house or a tiny home. I'd built a life, one where I was enough. The pain of my parents' betrayal would always be a scar, but it didn't define me. I was Ethan, carpenter, friend, partner, survivor, and that was enough.